Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Harling. I'm here today because I want to do a lesson with you in fractions. This was a topic that we were doing before school ended, so I want to kind of refresh your memory and go over some of the things that we talked about in class. So, the first thing I would like you to do is try to find a piece of paper, a pencil, a crayon, a marker, whatever you can find around the house, and come back to me in a few minutes with those things so that you can kind of follow along with me and write things down as we go along, okay? So I'll wait a few minutes. Okay, you ready? All right, great. So the first thing we're going to talk about again is fractions, and I just want to refresh your memory, like I said before. So what is a fraction? It tells us on the board. It is part of a whole number. We know that fractions are not whole numbers, and they're only a small part of a whole number, and we did talk about this in class. So I'm going to write a fraction on the board, and I want you to write it too. Can you say that fraction, boys and girls? Say it to someone in the house. Say it out loud as you write it down on your paper. If you said 1/2, you are correct. This is a fraction that shows part of a whole. It is 1/2 parts, which is also said as 1/2. Now, we could also show a model or a picture to represent what this fraction is. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to take a vertical line and divide it into half. Now, what you notice about that picture is that when it's divided into half, both parts are what? Equal. Very good. Both parts look the same. When we're talking about fractions and we're dividing it into equal parts, each part must be the same. So looking at it equally is very important. Now, I can take that fraction that I now divided into half equally, and I can shade one out of the two parts to represent the half. So please do that with me. All right, very good. There's your 1/2 with which represents the picture that we just drew. Now, I can also look at each part of that fraction and label it as we did in class and as we already learned, and I have some of those words up here. So, looking at the top number above the bar, what do we call that? Think for a minute. If you said numerator, you are correct. So I'm just going to put an N here. We know that the numerator in a fraction represents the part of the whole that has been shaded. So when we look at the two equal parts, we know that we've already shaded one out of the two parts. That's your numerator. So if that's the numerator, the bar below, or excuse me, the number below the bar is called, you got it, the denominator. So we're going to put a D there. And we know that the denominator represents all of the whole. So we know that this whole circle was divided into two parts. So the denominator tells you the amount of parts that are there in the whole, and all the parts are equal. So there's a quick example of a fraction with its numerator, with its denominator, with a model that represents what that fraction would look like. Now, there's something else interesting about this fraction. It's called a certain type of fraction because of the numerator. You see that the numerator is a 1. So what kind of fraction do we call fractions that have numerators as 1? Well, you see it right there on the board. You're right. It's called unit fractions. So think of some unit fractions you can write down on your paper real quick. Say them out loud and share them with someone in the house. All right. If you wrote 1/3 or 1/4, 1/5, or 1/8, or you may have written something else or something similar to that, you are correct because all of your fractions have to have something in common, that the numerators all begin with 1. That's what makes them unit fractions. Very good. Now, when we were learning fractions, we were also learning how important it is to compare them so that you know which is smaller and which ones are larger. So I'm going to take two of these fractions and I'm going to compare them to each other, okay? So over here on my board, I'm going to write 1/4. That's my first unit fraction, and you can write this with me. And I'm going to leave a little space and put 1/8. Everybody see that? I'll move it over a little bit if we can't. All right, there we go. I'll move this over a little bit so you can see. All right, great. Now, underneath each of those fractions, I'm going to do what I did for the half. I'm going to show a model or a fraction circle to represent each of the fractions. So I would like for you to do this with me. So you're going to draw a circle. And because this fraction is 1/4, we're going to divide it into how many parts? 4 equal parts. You are correct. And you're going to do the best you can. Remember, we talked about this. Your fraction circle doesn't have to be perfect. You do it the best you can. I'm going to do it the best I can. So I'm going to take a vertical line going down, a horizontal line going across, and how many parts are going to be shaded there? 1. Very good, because it represents the unit fraction, because the numerator is always 1. Now I'm going to draw a fraction circle to represent 1/8. And I'm going to make a circle again. Of course, just doing the best I can. And I'm going to divide it into 8 equal parts. And I'm going to do that the best I can. So I'm going to put an X in the middle, a vertical line going down, and a horizontal line going across. Now look at Miss Harling's. It doesn't look that great, but I'll fix it a little bit. I'll bring this line more toward the center. I'll make this line more toward the center. And I think it's a little bit better now. And now, how many parts out of the 8 am I going to shade? Only 1. Because again, I'm representing 1 out of the 8 parts. All right. So now I have 2 fraction circles to represent my fractions. I have 1 out of 4, which is 1/4, and 1 out of 8, which equals 1/8. And again, this one equals 4ths, but I have 1/4 and 1/8 as my models. Now I can look at those pictures and see which fraction is larger. It's pretty evident, isn't it? It's pretty obvious to see which one's larger. Tell someone in the house which fraction is larger. If you said 1/4, you are correct. You can compare the models and see this piece is larger than this one. So we did learn something about this, not only with the fraction circles, but also with knowing the denominators. We had to retrain our brain to think about fractions and not whole numbers. So now we know that 4ths is larger than 8ths. So we have to make sure that we understand that, because we're not talking about whole numbers anymore, right? So we know 4ths is larger than 8ths. So the last step that I could do is show a sign between the two numbers to prove that I know 4ths are larger than 8ths. Please tell someone at home, what sign would you put in between these two fractions to represent that a 4th is larger than 1/8? If you said greater than, you are correct. Had a smart class. There's your greater than sign to represent this whole model, okay? Showing that a 4th is larger than an 8th. So we know we can do that. And we've learned already that the smaller the denominator, the bigger the fraction. The larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction, especially when we're talking about unit fractions. We're only talking about 1/4, 1/8, or any of these down here. You're looking at the denominator to help you determine that. But you can also use fraction strips, fraction circles like we did here to prove that you know that a 4th is larger than an 8th. But we did write down the meaning of what that is all about. Again, we know the smaller the denominator, the larger the fraction. The larger the denominator, smaller the fraction. So we did talk about that. So this is it for today, guys. Just wanted to do a quick little review with you about what we've learned about fractions. It was very important for me to do that because I want to make sure you have remembered some of those things because we've been out of school. We will talk more about fractions in the upcoming days. I'm going to try to put up a video like every other day. So the next time we meet, I will probably talk either about equivalent fractions and me talk about fractions on a number line. And I am also going to continue to talk about comparing fractions, because one of the other methods we learned was the butterfly method or the cross multiplication, which is great. But I want us to be a little bit more deeper thinkers and not always say, oh, I can cross multiply to find out which one's larger. You should be using models too, okay? That really proves that you understand why each fraction is larger or smaller than the other. So anyway, we'll talk more about that, but I really am glad that you were able to tune in. I hope you can tune in again, and it was really fun. It was my first time, but I enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you again on YouTube. Thanks for joining me today, boys and girls. I miss you. Take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.